So, welcome to the 2023 DiLCo Lecture Series on Digital Language and Communication. I'm Heike Zinsmeister from the University of Hamburg, and DiLCo, the host, is a 3-year scientific network on digital language variation in context. It was initiated in 2021, and it's coordinated by my colleague Yannis Androtsopoulos, who's there, and myself. The network includes scholars from universities from the US, UK, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Denmark. It is generously supported by the University of Hamburg within the Universities of Excellence scheme, funded by the German government. Our network aims to stimulate scientific exchange between various approaches to digital language and communication research within linguistics, and also bridge gaps between qualitative and quantitative research methods. And to this purpose, we organize activities such as conference panels, methods workshops, and also this lecture series. Most of you have heard this introduction several times, but some of you are new today, so this is why I repeat this. Okay, important thing is that we are recording these lectures to build up a repository that is available open access from Hamburg University's video portal. It's called Lecture2Go. You can access this portal if you go to the DiLCo website. Each lecture is about 40 to 45 minutes, followed by discussion. Feel free to post questions and comments during the lecture into the chat or afterwards in person. Okay, I'm now delighted to introduce today's speaker, Malvina Nissim. Malvina holds a chair in computational linguistics and society at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. She studied linguistics and graduated in linguistics from the University of Pisa. Her PhD she obtained from the University of Pavia, both in Italy. Her postdoc she started out in Italy as well at the Institute for Cognitive Science and Technology in Rome, and then went to the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. She was a tenured researcher at the University of Bologna, where, and I think this is tells a lot about you, Malvina, that you obtained in Groningen, where you have your professorship, that you obtained a Lecturer of the Year award in Groningen. Malvina's research focuses on computational linguistic language modeling, as well as on the impact that language technology has on society. And this is what we will also hear about today. She is, one of the things she does is that she is member of the ethics committee of the Association of Computational Linguistics, the ACL, which is very influential in the area of computational linguistics. One thing, she has a long list of publications. Of course, I can invite you to go to Google Scholar and look at them. And one thing that was impressive is a recent paper from last year with colleagues, make the best of cross-lingual transfer evidence from post-tagging with over 100 languages. So it's about language modeling and also analyzing what these new methods of deep learning, which is the basis of the artificial intelligence tools that are in the media, and probably many of us have tried out. Okay, and today we are looking forward to hear you talk about what language technology has to say about us. The floor is yours, Malvina.
Thank you so much for the introduction and for all the things that you mentioned about me. I have to say that since I got this prize is always a little daunting than to have talks when this is mentioned, because it sort of raises the expectations a bit. And thanks for mentioning that paper. I'm not going to talk about that today, I would say, at all, but there is a part of it that actually I will maybe mention at the end in terms of what issues are related to how we do language technology today. So it could be a little bit of a different talk than others. It's not going to be technical almost at all. And I'd like everyone here also to interact a bit. So at some point I will ask some judgments of you or some questions, and I'd like you to answer. So to do this in a way that works on Zoom, I'd say that at some point I'll ask you something, and then you can use the reaction to say yes or no. When the moment that we get there, I'll mention this again. It's going to be pretty soon to start with, and then it will probably happen again. And I totally appreciate questions also along the way. So I'm not sure whether you normally would want me to take them, or we can leave them towards the end. But if you have anything, I'm not sure how much I'll be able to see the chat as well. But just, I hope this can be treated also as a bit of an informal, I'll give the talk, but I will also like it to be a little bit of an informal conversation on topics that I will raise. So to get started, language technology, I left it vague on purpose, is a little bit of everything right now, and we are a little bit overwhelmed. I was reading the other day that everyone who's working in AI, and especially language-based AI these days, has some anxiety issues because there's so much going on, and we're all quite a lot under stress by the recent developments. But one of the things that happen in language technology, which I'm not going to talk further so much in the talk, is that there are also multimodal models. So one of these, for example, is DALL-E, or a version that is small and is called Crayon, that is accessible for everyone, where models have been trained to have text as input and an image as output. And this is just completely fully generated. So on the basis of text, we will generate an image. And this is a little model that there are bigger models and more accurate. This is a small model that is now accessible on the web for everyone. I don't know how many of you have tried it. I might ask some questions like this, but it's hard for me then to see the answer. So I'll assume later I want a specific answer, but I'll assume that maybe some of you have tried it as well. Some will not have. So I'll just, there in the little line, you can write a little text, right? So what do you want to generate? So what I put in is a computational linguistics professor with long curly brown hair. So you can't see me well, I guess, but that's kind of me, at least can be me. And the generated images were like this. So none of them looks like me, I would say, but they shouldn't, right? Why would they look like me? I mean, I'm just asking the model to generate a person who's a computational linguistics professor with long curly brown hair, but you can also see, and maybe I don't even need to specify so much, why they do not systematically look like me. And I think you will agree that most, I would say all of them, do not look like female professors in a very sort of broad and way of defining female. I will take gender as binary in this talk with the assumption that is extremely simplified, and I hope it's not offensive for anyone. It's just a tool to actually go into issues that also relate to how we're doing things. So I will keep it simplified like that, but I hope it's not problematic for anyone. But anyway, I think you can see what's happening here. Now, I am a computational linguist. I look like that. I look like this. I had shorter hair there. And if we want to take a general definition of what a computational linguist is, I would put it that way. I've used this definition several times. Someone who processes and analyzes language data. We might develop algorithms, software for natural language processing, such as tasks such as speech recognition or machine translation, right? So these are tasks that are pretty common. You can come up with very many other tasks, but these are quite standard. So I'd like to stick a second with machine translation as one of the tasks that are very core to language technology and also have been revived very recently. And being Italian, I'm not mentioning there, but I'm Italian. I work in English most of the times. I often use Google Translate, but actually mostly for Dutch in my daily life rather than English and Italian. But in any way, Any case, so this is a Google Translate attempt at translating I'm a professor from English into Italian. Now, if you're not a native speaker of Italian, you might not know that Italian is a gender marking language, meaning that if I translate I'm a professor into Italian, I'll have to make a choice. So I cannot just use one expression for that. I'll have to say sono una professoressa if it's a female, and sono un professore if it's a male. Whereas this is underspecified in English. Now, if I run this through Google Translate, this is what I get. And you might think it's okay. And I also kind of think it's fine in a way, because masculine is the unmarked gender in Italian. It's also more frequent, is what you would find also in a dictionary. And without any further context is, it's not easy to make that translation. Assume that you had a better context. Would you expect, or more context, would you expect Google Translate to actually do this better? This is a question I find difficult now to get an answer to, but I actually now would ask you to give me some answers. So what I want to ask you is to assess, and some of you might have seen this already, so to assess on the basis of some tweets that you see, the gender of the author of those tweets. Yeah, to see whether, if you have a little bit more context, can you actually, you as a person, assess whether a given tweet was written by a male or a female? So the best way to do this, I assume, that is you use the reactions, and I'll try to see them. Maybe somebody also can help me. I would say we use the green tick. If you see the reactions, we use the green tick for female, or for whatever I ask you, and the red for male. Is that okay? Green tick, this one for female, and this one for male. Is that okay? Yeah? Okay. So let's try. This is let's see, this one. So I grew up watching many, well, you can read it. I will not read it myself. Yeah, so who thinks is a female can use the green thingy, and who thinks is a male can use the red thingy? Yeah, I see several males. I can't see them all. I think it's complicated, but some of them have not. Is mostly male. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for this. This was a female. Now I'm going to do that again. This is another one. And then I'll ask 1, 2, 3, male or female. Remember that your previous one will stay there if you don't remove it. So is this a male or a female? 1, 2, 3, please make your assessment. Yeah, it's an overwhelming male for those who assess this, and it's indeed a male. Let's try another one. Welcome a new addition. Oh, I will not read it. I think I shouldn't read it. This is what you see. Can you assess female or male? Okay, I see a majority of female here. Almost all, actually. I think there's only one. Marcus says male, and it is a male. And I'll go a little bit more into the details of this in a moment, but there was another. Of course, these are all real tweets. I didn't with the self stated gender by the author, and I picked them, of course, and I did cherry pick them for this specific experiment, let's say. There was another one that was a little bit like that, very similar with the cute and so, but it also had a lot of hearts and so I didn't pick that one. I picked this one, and this was male. What about this? Green is female, red is male. There is one male, for the rest is overwhelmingly female, from what I see in the chat. And this is a male. And this is one that gets, whenever I use this kind of example, I mean, this specific example, it's almost always overwhelmingly female, assigned as female. Now, we only have two left. This one. Green is female and red is male. And I can see is mostly female in the chat. And it is female. And then we have the last one, which is this. And I guess, of course, you see what's happening and you see what I've been doing. And I think here you go a little bit like, okay, if you could talk to me right now, you probably, I could ask you, are you actually focusing more on the Nintendo Switch bit or on the little hearts? And this is just so, what I'm saying is extremely stereotypical, but it's also guiding you somehow. And you do that and you might think like, oh gosh, this is so stereotypical. You still use this kind of information to make a judgment here. And this is mixed, but very few actually have made a judgment here. It's really mixed. There's a couple of males and a couple of females, but it's really mixed. Anyway, this is a male. Now, the question that I'd like to ask is also this. Would you want a model, a language technology-based tool? Would you want a tool that behaves as well as humans? This is something that we often discuss, yeah? So how is it actually that we assess the quality and the accuracy of language technology tools? It's like, normally it's human judgment. But I have to say, I don't know what you think. I'm not sure you were very, very good at this task. So would you want a tool that actually behaves like you? Do you want a tool at all that is able to do this? And let's go with this in mind, a second back to Google Translate and see what happens. Okay, we were here. We had a professor. We had both, potential translations, but the actual translation that Google Translate chooses is masculine, so is sono professore, and then it gives also an alternative translation, which is io sono professore. So it adds the pronoun that doesn't have in the previous version. If we give it a little bit more information, because that didn't know, so I use a name that is a female name. Yeah, so I use my name. And I'm saying Malvina is a professor. Maybe it's not very common as a name in English, but it's a female name. Then the translation is accurate. So if you give Google the right context somehow, Google Translate the right context, it will come back to the right translation. And again, we can check actually what the alternatives are, because the alternative could have been something else. Also, like any variation possible here is translating as an alternative, either as the teacher or is trying to make me male again, right? So because you never know, maybe it's good to have an alternative translation as male still. Then I tried to expand it a bit and said that I tried to say that I'm an associate professor. It translates it wrongly as male. It doesn't use the female form, but if you go check in the potential alternatives, it still gives the female version. Yeah, so the second one is a female version. And if I move to full professor, it still gives me the male version. And in the alternative versions, it just never gets to the female alternative. Yeah, it has enough context as it had. The only thing that changes is whether I'm saying nothing, I'm saying associate, or I'm saying full. This is the only difference that the tool sees when it makes the translation. The name stays the same. What do we learn from this? Well, I think we should bear this in mind another little bit, and I'll show you one last thing from the translation world, and then we have a further peek into what's happening. This is an example that is been circulating for a couple of years by now, maybe a bit less. It's a translation from Hungarian to English, and the problem is very similar. So in Hungarian, you do not specify the gender of the subject. Okay, but when you translate into English, you can't just say sleeps, eats, or X sleeps or X eats. You will have to have a pronoun there. And the pronoun at that point will have to be specified according to gender. So you will have to have she or you will have to have he. So these predicates that are there provided in Hungarian are like cooks, is clever, raises a child, is a professor, is a cleaner, and so on. When you translate into English, you can't just say cooks. Yeah, to have a well-formed phrase, you will have to add the pronoun. So you can say she cooks and so on, or you can say he cooks and so on. And this is a series of predicates. Now, do you have any guesses as to what is going to happen? Does anyone want to write anything or want to say anything? I'm very open if you want to just talk as well. But maybe it's complicated online like that. So I will just tell you that some predicates are going to be translated as associated to she, and other predicates are going to be translated as associated to he. Like she's beautiful, he's clever, he builds, she sews, he teaches, she's raising a child, and so on. Now, how upsetting is this? Could be not fully surprising maybe, but you'll go like, oh, scandalous, bad. These are tools that are used by people every day. And this is the kind of information that is encoded in such models. Still, I believe that you did use very, very similar stereotypes to guide your decisions when you were assessing the tweets. Eventually, this is extreme and it's not nice to see, but it's not very different from, I guess, most of us do when we are asked to make an assessment of that sort, implicitly. It's something that we try to counteract somehow. Implicitly, that's often what happens. So I think in this sense, and we'll get back to this, the tools are kind of bad, but they make us think. Why is it that these tools behave this way? Is it the tool's fault, or whose fault is it? And what can we do about it? And what can these tools actually tell about us as individuals and as a society? And which society are we talking about? So I think these are all questions that we have to keep there and have very clear in our mind when we discuss anything related to language technology and how we use it. Now, language technology used to be something that was really developed within teams and labs, and there are lots of tasks that are related to that, and they still exist. Yeah, so there's machine translation, there's matching job ads to CVs automatically, there's auto profiling, there's language generation in general, there's emotion detection, there's lots of tasks that get encapsulated into applications that we see every day. And this was not very well known to the majority of people who do use these applications. Just use application, you don't really know exactly how they work or what's behind that. Yeah, you're just the end user. But things have changed a lot with the advent of ChatGPT, which has brought the whole thing directly in interaction with just the general population. It's not just a matter of using tools, it's really like out there now. And it's very clearly open that although a lot of people still don't know exactly how that works, doesn't even matter. It's there and people are interacting with the tool. Now, can you please tell me, okay, is there someone who, and please do the red thing, is there someone who has not heard of ChatGPT? I guess that's not possible. We've been bombarded. Now, I'd like to know, and you can use the red thing, if somebody has not tried it. It's okay, yeah? I know a lot of people who have not tried it. Okay, some. Yeah, some have not tried it. So if you have not tried it, but you know what it is, you know that this is a chatbot that is providing quite incredible results. We can discuss a lot of ethical implications related to that, but if you haven't tried it and you're curious, I really think you should, also to understand what it's able to do and what not. So one of the comments that came out pretty quickly was that it can even do poetry, which was one of the cornerstones thought of like never being touched upon by machines. It's like, it's so hard. Creativity is so human. So I prepared this especially for those who have not tried it and don't have a full idea of actually how well it works. So I asked ChatGPT to make a short poem about DiLCo. So I said, it's a network, digital variation in context around online lectures and digital. Can you write a poem about this? I think it's excellent. I mean, it's not like what you would deem as very high level poetry, but it's not bad at all. Yeah, there's so much to explore. It's trying to do rhyming and not necessarily with exactly, the same morphological endings. It's just, it's really trying, their speech, their speech, and online lecture as a treasure trove. Let's join in and listen with glee as DiLCo shares his finding for us to see. It's questionable, but it's great. I think something like this was really not expectable. Even 2 years ago, 1 year ago, we would have thought, nah, not this way. Even GPT-3, the predecessor model of what's encapsulated now into ChatGPT, was not good at rhyming, for example. And it's still is not good at rhyming in other languages, but I think in English is quite good. And I didn't give it any other information, only what you see. So I think it's pretty good. But the topic is us. Yeah, so what is it that the language technology and its evolution, I think we've already seen some, and we'll pick it all up again at the end. But what is it that this language technology has to say about us? I did ask ChatGPT this as well. I said, what can you tell me about us? And it struggles, rightly, to say, I actually don't know who you are. But in general, as human beings, as species, it starts to say something. Yeah, you're highly social, intelligent species. You also face a number of challenges, conflicts, disease, poverty. It's pretty good. It doesn't even seem, it has a structure that after some time you'll figure out that is automatically generated, but it's really good. It is very good. But it keeps it general, and in a way, rightly so. Yeah, who is us? Now, how does this all work? We go back to all this. Yeah, I'm just giving you bits and then we put it all together. So how does this all work? Well, you take ChatGPT works like that too, but also the previous models that were simpler also work like that. So you take a lot of data, you make a model with that data, and then that model is going to be used by end users or researchers to do any sort of analysis, right? So things and information happen at all stages of this very, very simple framework that we can take in terms of like understanding language technology. But let's start with data. Yeah, so this is like, we start at the beginning, yeah, with data. So all of these models, and the bigger, the more data, are built by exploiting a lot of data. Now, data mostly comes from the web. The data that is used to build these models mostly comes from the web. I mean, there's lots of other stuff as well, like books that have been digitalized, also by private companies have access to a lot of additional data, but a lot of it really comes from the web. Now, what we have to ask ourselves is, what is this data? What is web data anyway? I'm just giving you two examples. For example, Reddit has a large, which is used in a lot of models, that is part of ChatGPT as well, especially for the interaction part. They use a lot of Reddit interactions to train the models. So users are not representatives of the world. They're representative of a very specific slice of the world. And that is the slice that the tools, also the tools that we have seen, including Google Translate, end up representing when they produce language, when they interact with us. So are these tools for everyone? Or are they going to be representative only of the people who created the data that the tools have been trained on? And then why do we see, for example, that female professors are hard to translate? Is that because there's not enough data about that in the actual world? There are not many female professors, not as many, or we don't talk about them? How does this kind of behavior reflect on how does it reflect on our society, on us? I also try to use Wikipedia. We also try to use Wikipedia whenever we do models, and also all these big models that are around do use Wikipedia, of course. So I have here the page for Groningen. You could take it for anything, and there's a lot of information there. And all of this information, of course, is produced by people. Now, you would think that Reddit is more maybe subjective. There can be fights and there can be a lot of stuff, and it's very male-oriented, but Wikipedia is taken as a much more objective source of knowledge. Can somebody tell me if you spot anything in this screenshot? I will need maybe a comment in the chat for this, or you can raise your hand, or you can just open the mic and say something. It's talking about two people who got married, and it's a description of Loretta Young and Grant Withers. So the first one is described, you know, she was 17, she eloped with a 26-year-old actor, Grant Withers. They were married, and then the Grant Withers in 1930 at 26, he eloped to Yuma, Arizona with 17-year-old actress Loretta. Marriage ended, Does anyone notice anything? Are they equivalent? I mean, they're mirrored, right? But are they equivalent? I'll wait another 10 seconds. Please spot it. Nothing? Okay. Now,
there's something in the chat.
Is it that? Annulment. No, it wasn't that. What it is that this description of what happened with their marriage is described as Loretta Young's career and as Grant Withers' personal life. What's wrong with this? If we assume that a woman's career really is related to her marriage to someone, we're injecting in models a very particular type of information. And we're not injecting the information directly because the models learn language and not necessarily the information directly. But it's a pretty big difference in terms of what happens afterwards when these models have acquired, have been exposed to all these massive amounts of data, and the data contains this kind of information, which is even for all of us, 20 people, hard to spot. But it's there. And what actually then the models end up doing and the decisions that they end up making, of course, depend on the decisions that we as humans have made for the data, in the selection, in the annotation, in the creation, the way we speak, everything that then is used to train these models. So I find it quite amazing that it's that way. But then if you look at that, you know, Wikipedia's population is also very skewed. There are not very many women who work on Wikipedia's pages. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Doesn't matter? Men should notice the same? Sure. But we all know that implicitly we behave in ways that we might not even like ourselves. We have a lot of unconscious biases. And these all percolate down in the writing and eventually in the models, of course. So because we produce the language, I've also asked more specifically to ChatGPT, what can you tell me about us as producers of the language that is used to train large language models like yourself and so on? I thought it has very good points. I'm not going to go through the whole because it's long, but it's talking about the diversity and complexity of the language we produce and reflecting the many nuances of human communication, constantly evolving and so on. But also it says that as a producer of language, we have an important role to play in ensuring that the language used to train these models is diverse and representative of the entire population. I actually think it's pretty much spot on. And this is made by a language model, or at least by a language technology tool that is based on a language model that is trained on a gigantic amount of data. Now, it's true that this is manipulated, is not just natural, because the way that ChatGPT has been trained relies a lot on interaction with humans. So it has this phase of a human loop, human correction loop, let's say. So humans intervene to make the model less biased, less toxic, and so on. Doesn't mean that the information is all gone, but this seems a pretty good statement from it. Now, if we go back to this, to the whole situation, I'd like to just take a quick peek into the model side of things. So now we use a lot ChatGPT. In the past, we were training from scratch, pretty simple model that were also easily interpretable, let's say. And there was a study that I thought was super interesting on author profiling, which is exactly what I asked you to do on the tweets, to do some author profiling, where they found that machines and people were doing more or less, where they had more or less the same accuracy in determining the gender of the author of a tweet, but in different ways. So the accuracy was not exactly on the same tweets. So the machine got some correct that the human got wrong, and vice versa. And what they found is that for example, the people were relying much more on lexical stereotypes than the machines. And isn't that more or less what you also did when you had to assess the tweets? So more or less same proportion, but different. And what we used to do this, we also trained a model to do this, and we use a very, very simple support vector machine. It was a linear model that was using character n-grams and word n-grams, so sequences of words and sequences of characters, and also single words and single characters. And what I thought was super interesting is that what we saw that the machine was relying on in terms of cues was also, but not only what we people tend to identify as characterizing gender, because we do. And it's nice to think about it in a way, because it makes us reflect on also our own actions before we criticize the machines which are actually then trained on our own data. But the machines also spot sequences that are not lexically charged as much. For example, if you see this circle here, as if, it's shifted in the female side. So finding as if would lean towards assigning the tweet to a female author. Whereas, for example, I am, or I'm here, is shifting towards a male author. And then, of course, there are the usual lexicalized stereotypes, like, you know, there's makeup for women and there's players and goals and whatever for men. It's stuff that we go like, yeah, come on, it's so bad. We do the same. And we write that way. And that is also why machines pick it up. Is it bad? Yes, it's also bad. But it should also help us figure out actually how we conceive things. So I've asked ChatGPT, like I've seen this tweet, just give you this example, and then I'm starting to close as well. I have more material because I thought, I don't know, well, let's see, it doesn't matter. For me, it's really a little bit like getting out ideas also in terms of how they come to mind. This actually I made this morning because I thought it would be interesting to see. So I asked ChatGPT what it thinks about this tweet. Like, can you tell me something about the person who wrote it? And then it says, sorry, as a language model, I cannot, I don't have access to information. Without any further information, I cannot provide any personal details. And then I corrected myself. I said, sorry, I just meant some characteristics of the author that you could infer from the tweet. And then he says, okay, from the tweet, we can infer that the author is a fan of a sports team named blah, blah, blah. The author also mentions a player named Jack Butler. Based on the use of exclamation marks and hashtags, which was also pretty interesting, the author seems to be excited and enthusiastic about the team's win and wants to celebrate. And then I pushed and I said, would you then say this is an enthusiastic person in general? So I was trying to get to the traits. Or would you think this is more likely a male or a female author, young, old? What's your take? And it answered and said, based on the language used in the tweet, I would say the author is likely to be enthusiastic about sports and maybe a fan of blah, blah, blah. Use of exclamation marks in case the author is excited about the team's win, and it said it before. And then, as for the gender and age of the author, is it difficult to determine from just one tweet? And then he said, the mention of a male player and the use of the word king in front of his name suggests the author may be male. Not sure about this inference. And the author could be of any age, but the use of hashtags and reference to a player by his social media handle may suggest that the author is younger and familiar with social media conventions. I think this is not bad at all, apart from the male thing and so, but in general, it's not eventually, if you think of what you did, what did you do when you had to do this silly task of assessing this? You could have told me, don't make us do it. Silly, but thank you for not doing that and going along with me. But it's probably not very different from what you thought. And then I asked, can you make a similar analysis of the other tweet that I had? Like, I don't want to be someone something. And says, yeah. And I said, I would really like to that you also provide explanations for your answer. So please do that again. So, you know, yes, I'll be happy to provide. It always says, I'm happy to do it. I can do it. Always very confident. So it says, I don't want to know. We can infer, maybe feeling a sense of independence, a desire for autonomy, use of phrase, blah. And then it says, based on the language used in the tweet, it's difficult to determine the gender or age. However, the tweet is shortened to the point, indicating the author may be direct and value clarity in their communication style. The tweet could have been written by a person of any age or gender. And without any more information, it's hard for me to say for certain. It's a pretty good answer. Yeah, and it's like, I can't do it. And it's true, you didn't really have the chance to say, well, several of you hadn't answered. But I find this very interesting that this model is providing this kind of answer based, well, it's a mix, right? It's a mix of leaning towards some decisions, for example, in the previous one about male, and not making any decisions for this. And then I also asked, can we predict if someone is a professor based on their gender? It says, no, can't do. And then it goes on and on about gender bias and discrimination and so on. And it's good, but it's good also because it's been curated. Not the answer, of course, but the model. And the model has been really further trained not to have toxic behavior or discriminatory behavior. It doesn't mean that the information is not there. So there are ways, of course, to sort of circumvent the model and kind of trick it. And maybe for those who have taken a look, maybe you have seen attempts at tricking the model to make it output a lot of hateful speech, a lot of discriminatory speech. Have you seen anything like that? Trying to jailbreak the model so that it really bypasses all the anti-toxicity that's been, like, you know, put into the training of the model. Who has seen something like this? you can use the green thingy if you have seen it. Yes, I see some. So it's very sunny now here all of a sudden. It's very odd. It's never sunny, but it's very sunny. So I see some greens, and I've seen this stuff myself. And that also, I think, we should ask ourselves, why do we do this? Is it really because we want to make sure that these models are not toxic and are not obnoxious? Or why do we try always to poke and push these models to find out that they're biased or they're toxic or they can produce terrible language or they can be used for cheating? Is it a protective measure that we have, or is it something else? So I think time is almost up and I have more things to say, but you can tell me if I'll go on or not. Should I sort of wrap up? I can wrap up. I'll wrap up. So there's one of the issues that is related, of course, to all this is bias perpetuation, because it's a major problem, of course. If we already think that there is some, say, bias profession and only like, say, a male can be a professor, and we already like talk, then we will talk in terms of that. So we will use he, for example, instead of she. Then all of this information, all this language will go into some language technology tool. And then the output of that technology tool, for example, a machine translation tool, will again perpetuate that stereotype. So we probably should be very, very careful into how we describe the world. And I think this, using language technology is actually, it can be dangerous, but it's also, if you have awareness, it's actually a pretty good way of making our own biases in terms of individuals, but also in terms of society, emerge. And just as a reminder that we are all actors in language technology, as producers of language, in my specific case, also as developers of tools, but also as final users. And it's crucial that we all have awareness in this. So I've also asked finally, like, what can you tell me about us, specifying like as users of language technology? And I think, it explains what you can rely on. And it also says that the use of language technology is not without challenges. Automatic translations could be inaccurate. It's important to understand its limitations. And I think, again, this is an extremely good point. And I found it interesting also that the model was able to distinguish the different kind of positions when I asked as producers of language and when I asked as users of language technology. It really highlights different aspects that could be problematic. And just before we close, for disclosure, the description of actually what a computational linguist is automatically generated, and I didn't write it. This was automatically generated by GPT-3. And I think, again, it was a really, really good description of what a computational linguist is. And I think I'd like to close to actually with this question is, what do we have to say then about language technology and the way that we interact with it? And with that, I would close.
Thank you very much. And the floor is open to questions and comments. And I will just start with a short question. Thank you, Malvina, for the inspiring presentation. I was wondering, do you think, don't we need two types of models? Models that are unfiltered and raw, that allow us to analyze stereotypes and maybe also diachronically what is in the world or what was in the world and what is changing, and then models for applications, for classifications, for making choices, for making translations that are kind of curated, filtered in a way that there's some utopia for a less stereotyped world. So do you think we would need two types of models?
Yeah, maybe at least two. No, I completely agree with you. And I'm not actually a huge fan of debiasing models. And that is for two reasons. One is that I actually think it's really interesting that we let models expose how we describe the world in our own terms without filtering. And that is also, once I was reading a paper about making word embeddings for Latin. And this is an incredible resource also to better understand the culture at the time. And then if you start to do debiasing, because there were things that now would not be acceptable anymore about slaves, for example, and so you would lose entirely the picture of actually what was happening then, as described by language, because we always have to remember that there's always this medium that is language in the way that we do this kind of analysis. And so this is one of the reasons, and I agree, that we would like to see actually how things stand. And the other reason is that when we talk about, utopia or a better world or an unbiased world, it's always incredibly subjective as how we would want to curate these models or make these models less biased, because the moment that you're eliminating maybe one bias, you might introduce a different one, even without realizing that. And who decides what kind of curation needs to be done? There's tons of attention to gender and to race as well, but there's a lot of intersectionality as well that has to be taken into account. I mean, it's very hard to pin down who and how should be curating, for example, the training data or even the trained models. It's really non-trivial at all how this should be done. I think it's a sort of whole research on how to do this. So to me, the main step, both as developers and as end users, is really awareness. So that you know that whatever you're using can be very biased.
Thank you. I suggest that people just raise their hand in the reactions or type into the chat. Okay, so another question. Could you, you skipped a slide that had, I think, learning as a cake, or the cake of learning or so. Could you show that slide to us?
Yeah.
And people are invited to ask questions. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I had this slide because I was not sure how much people would know about how ChatGPT is built and the different layers of training that happen in ChatGPT. So there's a first layer, which is like unsupervised training, which simply is language modeling. So basically the training objective is next word prediction, and the model does it itself because it already has all the language available, and it doesn't need any further supervised annotation or manual annotation for that. So that's how the core of the learning is done by a language model. And then there will be additional learning, which is supervised and involves, for example, trying to tell the model how, or partly supervised, how to tell the model how interactions work. So there can be dialogues and there can be more specific training associated with that. And then as a final part, you have the human feedback that is used to, in this case, specifically to assess the output of the model by humans, so that then this assessment is used to create an additional model that will be used to evaluate, to integrate in ChatGPT, so that the output is assessed as, yes, people would like it or people would not like it. And because you have all the human feedback, then you have enough to constantly improve this model that will do this assessment then automatically. And the learning as a cake, I mean, the metaphor is taken by Jan LeCun.
Mm.
And it has this, the top part is really what it's the most costly part as well. So it's also, the base you cannot do without. It probably would not be a cake. And then the top is additional and is very costly, but it can make it better.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. There are two raised hands. I think Yanis was first, and then Antonio Tagliatella.
Yes, thank you so much, Malvina. Two questions. The one referring to this slide, does the top layer, the cherry, does this refer to feedback that happens behind the curtains with the developers, or is this the live feedback from all of us?
It's both things in terms of, so it's behind the curtains. There's been a lot of that. And then there's the live interaction and everything that we do with it, both in terms of like typing stuff and pressing the yes or no is going to be used, and we don't know how. Exactly how this is being used to improve the model.
And another question for your assessment. Do you think that translations that are performed or executed by ChatGPT or other elaborated, evolved AI, do you think that these translations will avoid gender bias to a higher degree than, let's say, simple Google Translate operations?
I think so, because they are specifically further trained to do that. So, and also everything will be integrated at some point, I think. And also the, Google Translate is surely now using, they're all using larger models, right? So everything in that sense gets a bit better, simply because there's more and more data, but it's also further curated. So it is, I mean, the models are steered towards avoiding biased productions. And there's a lot of discussion as to why this is a good thing. That relates to also what Heike was saying. Is it a good thing or not? I think, again, depends a little bit on deployment, and depends on how much sort of hidden integration there is in tools. So if you don't even know that something is being automatically generated, and you see something which is very biased and you think somebody was writing it, is different than if you know that this was just automatically generated. But the whole problem still stays, I think, with all the implicit biases and because you always should be a little bit aware that they tap into your prejudices already. We all have them. There doesn't they're just there. So they will get reinforced, and
Thanks. Thank you.
Antonio?
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you, Malvina, for this very interesting contribution. I personally don't know where to start from, because the examples you made were very engaging, very interesting also. I'm one of those who never tried using ChatGPT. And now that I saw these examples that you showed, I have to say that I'm embarrassed as a researcher, because the replies that the machine gives us are too much meaningful, too much correct. As a researcher, I feel embarrassed because, when you go through these replies, it doesn't look like a machine. So my question is, where are we heading to with this artificial intelligence, which is very similar to the question you ended up with?
Yeah, I think this is one of the biggest questions, and I think that's also why people are saying that people who are working now in AI have a lot of anxiety, because we don't really know where we're going in terms of the field, but also as society. It's very difficult to imagine how all of this is integrated safely into the future, both in terms of researchers and the general users. So where is our research going to? I think this is a question that we're all asking ourselves.
But also in terms, if you think about that for a moment, sorry if I interrupt you, in terms of education of our students, because many students resort to ChatGPT. That's why I know this. Fortunately, in Italy, it is not really widespread, not yet. But I heard that in other countries, this is a model which is very much used, and it is a bit concerning, I would say.
Yeah, so we've had the first thing that happened here when ChatGPT came out is that we started to, as the experts in the university, we started to get invited by all of this faculty people worried about what happens with exams and what happens with the tests and essays and all that, because of course it's an incredible tool that will write things probably better than the average student, although a little bit flatter maybe than the student. And my take is that there is no going back, and there is no prohibiting, and the only way is to try and find ways to integrate this into teaching and testing, such that it becomes a tool for education in the same way that, say, the calculator has become a tool, and it hasn't fully killed our mathematical skills. But we have to find a way, and I think what's really challenging is to understand how to explain students what it can do, what it cannot do, and how it is best used. Because I think the best use of ChatGPT is to do something that you already know how to do, but to improve it. Like, it's important, for example, the students understand that it cannot be used for factual knowledge. That's not what it does. That's not a new search engine. It doesn't do that. It shouldn't do that. But it's good at rephrasing, for example. And can you use it or not? It depends on the context. Can we use, so I've heard of people like worried about students losing their argumentative skills because it can do it for you. I'm not sure that's true. It can maybe show you, if you manage to integrate it, then maybe it can show you potential ways of doing that. But then you could learn from what it does, or you can understand more about how language is used in general. And I think we will have to find ways to integrate it in education. There's no way of cutting it out, I find. It's probably not an answer, because where are we heading? I mean, I think right now no one knows, but I think we do need a little bit more regulation. And we would need time. And I think we don't really have time, because there's also this tension between companies and public institutions, and a lot of this work is done at companies. And now, for example, GPT-4 it was just released, and they do not disclose at all what training data they use. And there's been a massive, declaration that they've just had. We don't even know what it is trained on, but it's going to be used by everyone. It's a major issue.
Yes. Yeah, I know that there's no possible answer, because it's very much ethical also. So
yeah, and there's a lot of literacy, I think, involved, like training people to understand better what it can do, what it cannot do, and there will be a whole new range of jobs, like how to deal with it. And I think actually linguists will come a little bit to the fore again. And people who have more analysis skills and not simply technical skills.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So we have time for, I think, for one more question. Sabina Perino.
Yes, thank you so much for letting me ask my question. And thank you, Malvina, for really a fascinating talk. And building on this discussion, I was wondering whether we need to consider, since these are really systemic language ideologies that have been reproduced on everything we do, right? So I wonder whether in your field there is this idea that, we are doing that because we're actually relying upon the most hegemonic languages, such as English, the European languages. But, around the world, there are like 7,100 languages that are, in use. And of course, by using languages that rely upon binaries, such as the English language, for example, we end up in this kind of reproduction of these, detrimental ideologies in which we reproduce schemas and gender biases. there are some languages out there in the world which do not have that kind of binary pronouns. And, you know, even the Italian language, I'm actually Italian too, has different kind of like conjugations of the verbs, and you need to conjugate in the feminine or, you know, the masculine. So it's already a different situation between like English and Italian, for example. So first of all, I would like to understand if there is the willingness and the consideration of incorporating a more diverse pool of languages, a more diverse exactly pool of languages in the creation of these models. You know, so that's a very important question, because that's why we are at this point. It's because we have been excluding everyone else, right? Thinking about English as a global language.
Yeah,
right?
no, that is definitely a major issue that is actually in the community is heavily discussed. So one of the main problems that is discussed is like all of the communities that are left out by concentrating most of the language technology work on English. So the recent years have seen a surge of research done on what we call lesser resourced languages, starting from like, you know, languages that are actually still pretty heavily resourced. Like, you know, there's a lot of work on Dutch. It's still, you know, if you compare it to other languages in the world, it's still like, you know, super resourced, because also technological, digitally, I mean, it has a lot of resources. But one thing, so there is a lot of attention actually to that, and to what's called also colonization, in terms of like basically using English for everything and for doing all sorts of research. So in this sense, I think it's very nice that Heike mentioned that paper that we had that, yeah, attracted quite some attention last year, that where we tried to show that, because there's some of the work that is done when you do not have resources in a language that you're interested in, you try to exploit another language as much as possible in terms of like maybe training data and so on. And usually that language is English, just by default, simply because it has more resources, because we're used to doing that. So in that paper, we kind of show that it doesn't make any sense to use English. Like, it really depends on what language, what target language you're interested in. And English comes, you know, in terms, even with large data sets, it comes pretty low in the scale of what could be useful to use. And probably that is also due to the fact that how English is structured. I mean, it's not particularly rich morphologically. So if you want to then do something with morphologically rich languages, that's really not a good choice. But one thing that has happened in the field a lot is to try and train models that are multilingual. So is not only to concentrate on other languages, but to sort of put them together as well, and to have models that then are stronger because they have seen multiple languages. So if you then have to treat a language that you've never seen before, maybe there's a combination of information in these large models that are multilingual that could be helpful. And GPT itself is not just English. I only showed English because the talk is in English, but it writes perfect Italian. It's excellent at writing Italian, and it's excellent at writing Dutch. For example, in Dutch, it doesn't rhyme well. It hasn't learned that feature, but it writes perfectly in other majority languages as well. But the core problem that is still there in language technology in general is that it's still extremely restricted to specific slices of the human population in terms of in society minorities. So some people are never represented simply because they don't write online. They will never be represented. Mm-hmm. So local variations as well. If people do not write, like also pretty old people, you know, the old people who are there now probably are not, you know, their kind of writing, which is still a variation, is not included as representative in large models, because where is that writing collected in terms of training data? Where is it seen? They're less likely to be on Reddit than younger people. They're less likely to contribute to Wikipedia. They're less likely to be represented in general. And there are some languages that are completely excluded. So in terms of like language technology for everyone, we're really, really very far. and the way that we conceive biases in what we have, it's even a step above, because there's so much that it's even like completely excluded. And also like the tools, for example, speech recognition tools, there was a very nice sketch and was trying to show how difficult it was for a Scottish person to be recognized. It's English, yeah, but a Scottish person to be recognized by, I don't know if it was Alexa or some tool, simply because there's not enough data that is representative of that variant of English. And imagine everything else, which is just not represented. So it is a major problem, and it is discussed in the community. The community is very aware of that. There's no solution in sight, at least not right now.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions and also for your answers, Malvina. We are running out of time, so we have to close. Thank you again. Thank you very much. And Yannis, do you want to announce the next presentation?
The next talk will be in April, I think in 4 or 5 weeks. I think Thursday the 27th, I believe, by Rodney Jones. So we will advertise that as usual in advance. Thank you all so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.